Hopefully you guys are ready for it. FTX Greatest Hits, Fox News versus CNBC. Let's go over the last 14 days so I can break down the world's most obvious Ponzi scheme that was tipped off to regulators, that was well known, that there was mountains of evidence. There was no disputing the size of this Ponzi scheme, and anybody who spent 2 seconds looking into it could see the writing on the walls. But let's see the difference between CNBC reporting the news, if you even call it that, and Fox News. Let's start at day 14. Ready?
Here's the thing. He tweeted out an apology today that was the worst apology in history. There are some reports there was Reuters, I think also Dow Jones, that maybe they took customer money and traded that perhaps in an effort to save the whole thing, and that made it even worse.
Speaking of Madoff.
Yeah.
So there's probably fraud as well as stupidity.
There's some speculation about that. There was speculation he was on a run.
Sam Bankman-Fried, who founded trading firm Alameda Research in 2017 and crypto exchange FTX in 2019, quickly rose as the savior of the industry. SBF, as he's also known, and his companies poured billions of dollars of liquidity into the space, bailing out businesses like BlockFi and Voyager Digital. As recently as August, SBF told CNBC that FTX had $1 billion in cash to deploy at any given moment.
Susan running into the studio with last-minute news. What do we got?
Yeah, so I was just sifting through a lot of the commentary this morning. The former Treasury Secretary calling it a possible Enron, in his view. Ooh. You have other commentators saying that they feel they were duped because Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX, was one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world, and he was effectively the poster child for this new asset class.
Again, Bankman-Fried has resigned his role. Yeah. And will remain to assist in an orderly transition.
Unbelievable.
So there it is. At this
unbelievable
at this moment. You know, it is interesting. Any number of people I've spoken to who dealt with Bankman-Fried all describe him in very nice ways.
Everybody.
They say, "Oh, it was accidental." Obviously, this is
I
a
use
company
my show a lot.
that
I
did
love
not
them.
have. It's unclear how this. There's so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know.
Well, here's what we know.
Well, let's talk about that, Gary, because critics would say, look, you have been talking about the need for regulating and yet have not. There's been lots of focus. We had you on last time when you went after Kim Kardashian. But on a relative basis, going after Kim Kardashian compared to what is now a massive undoing of FTX isn't enough. What do you say about that?
Look, I think that investors need better protection in this space. But I would say this is a field that's significantly non-compliant, but it's got regulation, and those regulations are often very clear. And we have multiple paths. And one path is working with those crypto exchanges, crypto lending platforms, and to get them properly registered. And why that matters is that's so the public's protected. But we have another path, which is enforcement.
The Democratic Party finds itself in the middle of the biggest financial fraud case in U.S. history. A cryptocurrency company, like the Bitcoin things, just lost $2 billion of its customers' money. They didn't just lose it in the market, it's just gone. Someone stole it. And the company called FTX just went bankrupt after they blew up $32 billion.
The crypto market in chaos after the collapse of the FTX exchange, with a new set of questions on where billions and billions of dollars went.
A criminal investigation of its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, has been opened in the Bahamas.
This is being called the worst disaster in the history of crypto.
This is bigger than Bernie Madoff. But unlike Bernie Madoff, who was getting rich off a Ponzi scheme, the Democratic Party was getting rich off of FTX. Now, FTX came onto the scene in 2019, and it spent $10 million to put Joe Biden in the White House in 2020. And the guy running FTX, the second biggest Democrat donor in the midterms, after Soros, of course, spent $40 million to get Democrats elected. Wonder why someone like John Fetterman was able to raise as much as 4 times as much cash as Oz? Well, you can thank Sam Bankman-Fried, who ran this crypto scheme out of a penthouse in the Bahamas. And the charity was the Democratic Party. Look at Sam right there behind George Soros. Soros paid for a crime wave, and Sam may have committed a crime to stop a red wave. The guy was throwing so much money around, it got the owner a seat right next to Clinton. And he got an invite to Bill's after party with celebrities like Katy Perry, of course. You know, Clinton's really got an eye for mega donors. First Epstein, Sam Bankman-Fried, who they call SPF. If you spend enough money on Democrats, they don't care how you got the money as long as it gets to them. All the celebrities were jumping in, too. Larry David was doing commercials for the guy. Tom Brady and Giselle were ambassadors. The John Fetterman of cryptocurrency, SPF, was just at the White House, actually. He got 2 closed-doors meetings with Biden's senior advisor in the spring, right around the time Biden was shipping billions to Ukraine. The funny thing is, Ukraine was an investor in FTX. I mean, if they have to invest in anything, doesn't crypto sound a little risky for Zelensky? No. Zelensky thought he'd give it to a guy living in a tax haven, fresh out of college with funny hair. Well, when Democrats are sending you billions of dollars of weaponry, the least you could do is reward their favorite mega donor. And what did FTX do with the money Ukraine invested? Well, they plowed it right back into the Democratic Party.
Now I want you guys to focus on exactly who is in these CNBC interviews. Exactly the guest, exactly the person, and wait for the evidence that's going to be released over the next month, maybe month and a half, and see what side of the aisle these names end up on. Talk about doing damage control.
Well, you know, listen, I spent a lot of time with him, actually. We traveled to the Middle East. This is before these revelations were exposed. We were embarking upon helping him fundraise. He had purchased 30% of my business, and so as good citizens, we were trying to help him around the world. When the crisis hit over the weekend, I made a unilateral decision to fly down to the Bahamas on Tuesday in the spirit of helping. And so you caught what Brian was saying there. The original idea was this is a rescue finance situation, and could we somehow help, which would obviously help the entire industry. And then when I got to the Bahamas, it became clear, at least from some of the people that worked on the legal team and the compliance team, that perhaps there was more going on than it being a rescue situation. So when I left the Bahamas in the afternoon, I was actually distressed. I don't want to call it fraud at this moment because that's actually a legal term, and none of us know. And we have to leave it up to the regulators, and we also have to give everybody a presumption of innocence. But I have to tell you, I'm distressed about it. I don't like it for the industry. And I would implore Sam and his family. He has 2 wonderful parents, Joe Bankman and Barbara Fried. I would implore them to tell the truth to their investors, get to the bottom of it, stop 22 tweets, but get themselves in front of a regulator and explain exactly what happened. And if there was fraud, let's clean it up to the extent possible and repair the accounts at FTX.
It's almost hard to even know where to begin with something like this. We're talking $32 billion, bigger, twice as big as Enron, a guy who was put on a pedestal from everywhere from Silicon Valley to Washington, D.C., where he spread millions of dollars to politicians.
Well, we begin with what we're going to probably hear from them, and that's their defense. What? We didn't do anything fraudulent. We just screwed up. You know, there's no guarantees when you make an investment.
$10 billion, Kelly just mentioned it as well. $10 billion taken out the back door. I don't know if you've seen a schematic of how this company was set up. It's nuts. It's set up like the world's biggest corporation. There's so many small compartments there. Apparently a back door was conceived where they took money out of this and put it into a hedge fund. I mean, clearly that's illegal.
It's certainly in the court of public opinion, something doesn't seem right about that.
You know, people are upset too. Again, I mentioned all the money that Sam Bankman-Fried poured into politics, the number 2 donor to President Biden. His co-CEO put a lot of money in with the Republicans.
You took this investment in international and U.S. I got to ask for your reaction today.
Obviously, one of frustration. There's no question about it. I'm still a huge advocate for the potential of it sets, in a way, though, I always try and find what is the outcome of something like this. I mean, what is occurring? And I'm just one voice in it. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to fly to Washington, and I want regulation. It's time to move forward with regulation. This is the bottom of the crypto market. A massive player goes to zero, and now you build from the ashes. That's the upside, and probably a buying opportunity. That's the way I look at it.
What do you know about CZ, Binance, BNB Coin? How do you know that it's not leveraged, that there are many more dominoes to fall here? We just had someone from another exchange who hasn't even published their board of directors. You invested in FTX, and that wasn't exactly a wise choice. You said you did due diligence, but clearly it wasn't enough.
No. I mean, look, I'm going to agree. Everybody's saying the same thing. It's great to be a retail investor and trade a few $1,000s worth of crypto. And if that's what Binance is going to do, good for them. Can't play with this structure anymore because there's not enough transparency. I'm going to wait for the SEC or whoever it is going to be, the Fed or whoever, to regulate this stuff. This is actually a turning point for this industry. It's a maturation for this industry. That's what's going to happen.
Pretty crazy how Kevin O'Leary was the first one to jump on there and show face. Regulations. We need regulations. You guys, no institutional investors are going to invest in crypto without regulations. Without these regulations. As Kevin O'Leary said,
if there's ever a place I could be that I'm not going to get in trouble, it's going to be at FTX. If there's ever a place I could be that I'm not going to get in trouble, it's going to be at FTX. If there's ever a place I could be that I'm not going to get in trouble, it's going to be at FTX.
The most regulated exchange in world history turned out to be the biggest Ponzi scheme in world history. What does that tell you about your regulations, Kevin O'Leary? Oh man, I can't wait. I can't wait till the evidence that's coming out, man. You guys got to see this stuff. Text messages from Mr. I won't say anything, and Mr. SBF, quite possibly with regulators. Ooh, Washington text messages coming out next week.
Let's start maybe with the main character in this story. What can you tell me about the infamous SBF?
So he developed very tight relations with the left, basically.
Tell me about their relationship, because it seems like he performed this virtue signaling very successfully. He cozied up to the Democratic Party, and in fact, he cozied up to the American government, where he was dealing with and encouraging government agencies that would ultimately oversee his company, FTX.
Right. So the issue of regulation has always been a controversial one within the crypto space. On one hand, you have those people who said we should not be regulated at all. This is a disaster. All the regulations will only lead to more corruption and will normalize our ventures. We're not here to be more normal. We're here to be revolutionaries. That was always the old attitude. Then you had the kind of establishment crypto people come along and say, no. We got to play nice with regulators because we need the rule of law. And we're going to get regulated anyway. Better we have a foot at the table. So that was the basic division. Basically, what he was hoping for was the regulators to look the other way by paying them off. I mean, that's my read on the situation. And so, in a sense, it was a brilliant trick, unprincipled to be sure, and may turn out to be very highly criminal.
And an insurance scheme, essentially buying insurance from the federal government, from politicians who would ultimately be there to hopefully bail him out one day. So we set the stage. Here's a 30-year-old entrepreneur in the business of cryptocurrency who plants as his flag that he is an effective altruist. Whatever he makes, he intends to give away. One of the ways he gave that money away was he was the second largest donor, behind only George Soros, to Democratic politicians. And it was all in service of FTX.
Hey, Andrew, good morning. Yeah, these are some of the details we've been waiting for around FTX's bankruptcy. In an updated filing in Delaware's bankruptcy court, lawyers now say the crypto giant has roughly 1 million creditors. When FTX filed its bare bones paperwork on Friday, it said it could have more than 100,000 creditors. We do expect to get a list of its 50 biggest by Friday. FTX also saying over the past 3 days it's been in contact with dozens of regulators in the U.S. and abroad, including U.S. Attorney's Office, SEC, and CFTC. The company says FTX faced a severe liquidity crisis that necessitated the filing of these cases on an emergency basis last Friday. We've also got Alvarez and Marsal working on restructuring. Lawyers point out the complexity of this case with over 100 FTX entities involving non-traditional assets, as they put it. It also mentions FTX's governance. Reminder, FTX didn't have a board or a CFO. John Ray is now the new restructuring officer. For context, this is the same John Ray who worked to restructure Enron. He's now working with an external legal team and cybersecurity as well as forensic investigators to secure customer money. And in addition, FTX hired independent directors at each of FTX's parent companies, they say, to ensure proper governance, and some new independent board members. Sam Bankman-Fried, now the former FTX CEO, out with some cryptic tweets as well overnight, saying that he is going to talk about what happened and says, we haven't gotten details yet there. We will keep an eye on that, but no concrete details from Bankman-Fried's. His market maker and hedge fund was one of the biggest in the industry. It's having a market impact now that that's winding down. FTX, meanwhile, was the second largest exchange. So its clients did add some significant liquidity to the market. Data from Kaiko says this past week has marked the largest drop in liquidity they've seen across any other crypto market crash. They're now calling it the Alameda Gap, and thinner markets tend to mean more volatility, which we've seen, although Bitcoin is up slightly this morning.
The collapse of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX is, even if you're not interested in cryptocurrency, a history-changing event. It may turn out to be the biggest single-day loss of assets in the history of money. Billions of dollars evaporated in just moments, and it's still not clear what happened to a lot of that money. It just disappeared. And as it did, it sparked a growing financial crisis across entire sectors of the economy, a disaster that quite possibly could get very worse very soon. But the story of the FTX implosion is bigger even than the global recession it may cause. It is the story of the complete and utter corruption of the people who run our country. The very people who should have been covering and regulating and reining in FTX and its 30-year-old founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, were instead profiting from the scam. Not just a few of them, nearly all of them. From the news media, paid off by Sam Bankman-Fried, to the leadership of the Democratic Party, also paid off by Sam Bankman-Fried, to the chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC commissioner himself, Gary Gensler. They all knew that FTX was not a real company and that Sam Bankman-Fried was a fraud. And if they didn't know that, they certainly should have known that, because it was very obvious to anyone who bothered to pay attention. One of the few who did pay attention was a short seller called Mark Cohodes, who took one look at Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF for short, and recognized here is a con artist, obviously. Watch this tape, which aired on Hedge Eye TV, a small investment advice channel, back in October.
When anyone tries to pin SBF down on where he made his money, you can't get a cogent answer. Then you take into account that SBF is bailing out known Ponzi's and frauds in the crypto space. Everyone who's gone bankrupt or is a proven fraud. But nothing here fits. Everything reads like this thing is a complete scam. And I think this thing is dirty and rotten to the core.
So if that guy on a small audience investment channel could tell that Sam Bankman-Fried was a fraud, where was Gary Gensler of the SEC? And by the way, the tell in the sentence you just heard is that Sam Bankman-Fried couldn't explain where he got his money. Here you are, a 30-year-old billionaire. How'd you do that? If you can't tell us, then maybe that's a red flag, and you would think most investors would have recognized it. But for the most part, they didn't. Nor do they seem to notice the obvious incompetence of Sam Bankman-Fried's business partner / girlfriend, Caroline Ellison. Ellison was totally and obviously unqualified for the job she claimed to have. She had no track record of success at anything. She reportedly wrote online about her drug use. Oh, I've lost a ton of money. No big deal. It's not mine. And no, there's no math here at the cryptocurrency exchange. Now, let's send her billions of dollars. Lost a lot of money that investors, including institutional investors, including individuals who are hoping to retire with that money, all gone because we don't do math. It's so outdated. But here's the amazing thing. None of this seemed to faze the biggest institutional investors. Sequoia, their entire job is to what? Assess risk. But it wasn't really about risk and reward. It was about something else. Earlier this year, Michael Grimes, a former spokesman for Bill Clinton, who seemed to be making an awful lot of money somehow in the financial world, approached Elon Musk, the world's richest man, with an investment offer on behalf of SBS. Sam Bankman-Fried wants you to invest. Elon Musk didn't get to be the richest man on the planet by investing in things like that, so he apparently smelled BS and turned Grimes down. But in their exchange, which has since become public, Grimes multiple times told Musk that, by the way, Sam Bankman-Fried is a huge donor to the Democratic Party. Quote, major Democratic donor, Grimes wrote to Musk, second to Bloomberg in donations to Biden campaign. What does that have to do with the investment? It should be irrelevant, but that was the substance of the pitch. What is this exactly? Doesn't quite sound like a business. It sounds like a hybrid of some kind, and not in a reassuring way. Now, some of this was happening in secret, but a lot of it was happening right out in public, right in front of the news media. And of course, a lot of them knew Sam Bankman-Fried because he was sending a lot of the money. And when he wasn't, he was desperate for the publicity they could provide. Sam Bankman-Fried was on the cover of more magazines than Madonna. They probably should have been asking questions about his business, but none of them did. They promoted him. Watch.
They call him the JP Morgan of crypto, right?
Yeah, the Michael Jordan of crypto, if you will.
He's the JP Morgan of finance, of crypto. He's the Michael Jordan of crypto. But wait a second. Michael Jordan's not in crypto. He played basketball. Well, Sam Bankman-Fried's not really in crypto either. How are we all getting rich? Who knows? Don't ask questions. He's the JP Morgan. He'll be a trillionaire. So why were all these people pushing a scam that any normal person, even a person with no background in finance and just sort of a elementary understanding of profit-loss equations, could have seen was probably going to collapse in the end? Now, we're not sure. Stupidity clearly plays a role. So does the herd instinct. So all we can ask really is who was benefiting from all of this? Well, we know that the Democratic Party benefited. As we told you, Sam Bankman-Fried donated $40 million to Democrats this cycle. That's more than any other donor apart from Soros. Then he pledged another $1 billion for the next election, $1 billion in one election, because that's democracy. He wasn't doing this in private. He was bragging about it. And then he was going on in public about how politicians, Democratic politicians, were begging him for money. Watch this.
So how do you find political fundraisers? They come to you directly? Is it easy to get to you and say, we need this money for this candidate? And what type of candidates do you tend to support?
Oh, yeah. Well, if I pulled out my phone here and just looked at my last 10 text messages, about half of them are going to be people asking for, politicians asking for contributions.
So why were you telling us this in public? And by the way, if you're shaking like a naked man in a snowstorm in the middle of an interview, maybe there's something wrong with you. Send that boy another $1 billion. So how substantial are we overstating this? We're making a partisan point so that things collapsed. It was clearly a Ponzi. Are we trying to attack the Democratic Party now? No, it's actually justified. This guy was a major donor. According to the head of Citadel, defeating Donald Trump was literally on the balance sheet of FTX. Watch this.
FTX crosses into a zone that all of us are worried about. On the balance sheet of FTX is a line called Trump lose. And Sam was the second biggest donor to Democratic candidates.
I'm going to leave it to everybody else to draw their own conclusions about what you're saying here.
Then the reporter says, we're out of time. We can't go too deeply into that. Really? Let's go more deeply into it. It's pretty interesting. So, of course, politicians love the guy because he was just a cash spigot, and that's what they want most. But where were the regulators? Because there is a government that's supposed to be independent of office holders, a regulatory state that keeps Ponzi's from happening. Where were they? Well, Sam Bankman-Fried was himself invited to Washington to consult on crypto regulations. And then he posed for a picture with Maxine Waters, who's the head financial regulator in the Congress. And then the Washington Post, which is the hometown newspaper of government, did no reporting on his actual business. They just wrote a puff piece about how cool is it that the guy with funky hair who can't sit still and sleeps on a beanbag is getting super rich. How did he pull this scam? How did he do that? Well, he did it with religion. That's the quickest way to blind people. If they think you share a common faith, but no one benefited long-term from FTX's collapse or will benefit more than government regulators. They are pointing to FTX and demanding more control over cryptocurrency and ultimately the end of the cash economy. Why do we think they're going to do that? Because they're already working on it. SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce said this week that the demise of XTS could be a, quote, catalyst for more regulation. So why should you worry about that? Well, because as we saw in Canada last year, crypto is a huge problem for governments. Governments can't control, ideally, cryptocurrency. You can't freeze someone's personal cold wallet with crypto in it if you don't like what they say. So what does this have to do with the collapse of XTX? FTX. Well, it turns out that Sam Bankman-Fried's girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, has a lot of connections to regulators. In fact, the biggest regulator of all in this country. Her father, Glenn, is an MIT professor who worked at that university alongside, drumroll please, Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, which is in charge of cryptocurrency regulation. FTX's general counsel used to work with Gensler on the Commodities Future Trading Commission. Now Gensler is about to get a lot more power. So this thing swells to unsustainable size and inevitably implodes. It collapses, and that collapse is used for a pretext to do what they've been planning to do all along. So it probably shouldn't shock you that right after FTX's collapse, every major bank in this country announced a new partnership with the New York Fed to establish a new digital currency. Oh, digital currency, the one they can regulate and control. Citigroup, Wells Fargo, MasterCard, HSBC, all working on a 12-week digital dollar pilot. The Fed describes this project as a regulated liability network. So what does this mean long term? Well, if they have control of your money because it's digital, you can't stash it under your bed. If they don't like what you say, they can turn it off and you're impoverished. In other words, this whole thing is a bigger scam even than it seems, and it was made possible by political sloganeering. And Sam Bankman-Fried, if nothing else, is not stupid, and he knows that well. As he put it in a message to a reporter the other day from his hideout in the Bahamas, the woke posturing is the most effective possible business ploy. And we're quoting, "I feel bad for those who get effed by it," he wrote, "by this dumb game we woke Westerners play where we all say the right shibboleths and everyone likes us."
Fast-moving, so fast in the development, fast-moving developments with crypto and FTX last week boggles the mind. If you blinked, you missed it, or some of it, Kate. And
with our CNBC investigative team on how FTX unraveled, according to a source familiar with company operations, the quant trading firm founded by Sam Bankman-Fried, Alameda, was using customer funds from Bankman-Fried's crypto exchange, FTX, in a way that flew under the radar of investors, employees, and auditors. We spoke to sources who say FTX and Alameda kept these assets off of its balance sheet, and FTX drastically underestimated the amount it needed to keep on hand if customers eventually wanted to cash out. Part of the issue was the way the exchange accounted for margin trades. According to the source, it allowed clients to borrow crypto from one another, and it wasn't properly tracking the value of those cryptocurrencies. Alameda was also trading on margin and using a cryptocurrency created by the FTX exchange called FTT as collateral. We also spoke to current and former employees who say it was a small inner circle that knew about this alleged mishandling of funds, and Bankman-Fried declined to comment on that, but he did tell CNBC a margin position took a huge hit, as he put it. A lot of other news over the weekend around FTX.
Yeah, the crypto company. The call for accountability comes as Democrats hold on to millions of dollars in campaign contributions from that guy in the picture.
Yeah, he's down in the Bahamas. He is talking to reporters. Kevin Cork is live in Washington with all the details for us. Kevin?
Morning, guys. The House Financial Services Committee is set to hold a hearing on the FTX collapse, even as the committee chair, Maxine Waters, continues to dodge questions about whether lawmakers should give back their donations.
I think some lawmakers that got donations from FTX's founder should give that money back.
Well, I don't want to get into that. As a matter of fact, both sides, Democrats and Republicans, have received donations.
By every measure, regulators and others are beginning to follow the money. FTX doled out major cash to Democrats for the midterms, including $27 million to Protect Our Future PAC, $6 million to the House Majority PAC, that's aligned with Nancy Pelosi, and $2 million to the GMI PAC. Now, Bankman-Fried faces possible extradition to the U.S., and that news comes amid revelations that his father drafted legislation for Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. And now SBF, as he's known, is tweeting his way through the financial calamity, adding yesterday 18 more tweets to a meandering thread in which he apologized for his failings, adding, "We got overconfident and careless."
What about Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from the Shark Tank?
Yeah.
How could he get caught up in this?
Yeah, Brian, so I sat down with Binance's chief strategy officer here in Chicago. He essentially said he was shocked at what they saw when they went through FTX's numbers. Reminder, this was a non-binding letter of intent. They said that they were looking to buy this deal or buy this company in earnest. And he told me they had 30 days to do the deal. They got 2 hours into the diligence process. He said they decided then, within 2 hours, that the company was beyond saving. And Brian, we did reach out to FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried on those accusations. No comment. from the companies. But the former CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, now saying that he is still looking at financing options despite that company filing for bankruptcy and that process really being underway at this point. This morning, the new CEO, John Ray, out with his own pretty sharp criticism of what happened here at FTX. And as you mentioned, Brian, this is the same John Ray who was in charge of restructuring Enron.
I've been doing a lot of reporting on this. I actually know who this guy is for a change. You know, he was always in the background. I was never quite, he was never quite came on my radar screen until he started buying companies, distressed crypto companies, over the last 3 or 4 months, and then tried to start this exchange that, like a SEC approved exchange where he had a meeting with Gary Gensler. Then he started coming up, and I started asking myself, and this is a question that I think everybody has to ask themselves, why didn't he raise any eyebrows at the SEC when he was buying all this stuff when everybody was losing money in crypto? What was the secret sauce that allowed him to make so much money when the whole crypto universe is getting toasted?
Hey, David, that's right. We did have a nice sunny live shot about 20 minutes ago. And you can see the umbrella here. It is raining. I spoke to Sam Bankman-Fried here in Nassau on Friday. And despite being ousted from FTX in the company's bankruptcy, he says he's still spending most of his time still trying to broker a bailout. He declined to talk about some of the financial details around the fall of FTX, what we all really want to know. And he did decline an on-camera interview or a longer talk on the record. He is hunkered down here, though, in an upscale Bahamas neighborhood. And he told me there are billions of dollars of potential funding out there to make customers whole, as he put it. We also talked about getting as much value to users. He said he hates what happened and he wishes he had been more careful. He also maintains that there are billions of dollars in customer assets available, despite not having access to his corporate email or any of the FTX systems right now. Guys, this is, of course, a long shot, and legal experts tell me an SBF deal, Sam Bankman-Fried deal, would be no different than any other third-party bidder at this point. But legal experts also tell me that him being part of the solution may actually help in a criminal or civil court. No response from him on that. FTX's new CEO, John Ray, over the weekend, saying that he is also exploring sale options for FTX.
Democrats' ties to Sam Bankman-Fried, making it difficult to regulate the crypto market.
Somehow no one noticed that he was basically a child wearing shorts who played video games during interviews and didn't seem to understand how his company was making money. But they lauded him as the world's first future trillionaire. They all fell for it. Well, not all. A very few didn't. They saw right through it. Elon Musk, for example, said he took one look at Bankman-Fried and his BS detector went off. And then, at much greater length and depth, last March, the CEO of CME Group, a man called Terry Duffy, met with Sam Bankman-Fried. And during that meeting, Duffy did what pretty much nobody else did, maybe nobody else at all ever did. He called Sam Bankman-Fried a, quote, absolute fraud to his face, which of course he turned out to be. Then in May, Terry Duffy kept going. He tried to warn Congress about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. Here's what happened.
I'm asking you, sir, you have a saying so that FTX has, quote, no capital requirements for participants. I think that's on its face a false statement, given that the CFTC Part 39 regulation requires capital requirements, and FTX does have a capital requirement for margins.
I said their capital requirements are not the same as they are for other institutions.
Well,
capital is not the same as margin, Congressman.
Well, sir.
So Ro Khanna, Democrat of Silicon Valley, getting emotional as he defends Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. Why is that? Maybe someone will do a story to find out why. But in the meantime, we are grateful to have Terry Duffy join us. He's the CEO of CME Group, a man who has been completely vindicated. Why do you, and thank you so much for coming on tonight. Why do you, and by the way, I should recommend to our viewers, there's a whole lot of tape that we don't have time to play of you making this case at great length on the internet, and it's worth watching. But why do you think you're one of the only people to get this right?
I don't know, Tucker. It's a great question, but I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you playing that piece with the genius from California that telling me how crypto markets work and the difference between capital. What I was referring to is excess margin, which CME holds over $200 billion, where FTX was having regulatory capital, which is absolutely nothing. So he didn't know the difference between regulatory capital and margin capital, so it made me laugh. But, really dismissive when it comes to a guy like that. So I don't know why people didn't see it, Tucker. I mean, I said to my team, I said, this is not about crypto, Tucker. This is about him trying to change the world so he could list every single product under the scam that he was trying to do with crypto. The crypto is so small, but if he could deploy his model in the U.S. Treasury market, in the U.S. agricultural market, can you imagine the damage this human being could have done to our country and the world? I mean, and people literally we're turning a blind eye to it. When you look at the people that were with him, Tucker, Mark Wiegand, the former head of the CFTC, the chairman, he's walking around with this guy as his, baggage handler and giving him credibility. The former counsel for the CFTC became his general counsel at FTX. The former head of the ad committee, Mike Conaway, is his consultant working the room across both sides of the aisle. I mean, it's absolutely an embarrassment what went on here, and nobody bothered to look at it. I said he could lose 85% of his value in a single day, Tucker. I said that in congressional testimony. I did not know how right I would be in such a short period of time. It was a completely fraught proposal, what he was doing. I knew he was a fraud the day I met him, and it was quite easy to pick out.
Well, so you assessed his character and his vibe because you met with him personally, but you also assessed the fundamentals of his company as someone involved in business would. Why did none of the regulators do that? Where was Gary Gensler?
Well, I don't know where Gary Gensler was, but my regulator at the CFTC, I asked them, why in the world are you invoking the Commodity Exchange Act, Section 5, Paragraph B, which says the commission will entertain innovation. It also says in that same part of the act that you will protect market under surveillance and everything else to protect the consumers that are using those markets. They were using that. I want to know, was there pressure put on the agency from politicians or not? And there's hearings coming up. I hope someone has the courage to take on the commissioner of the CFTC and others and ask them why they were trying to put a round hole in a square peg. They should have dismissed his proposal out of hand. Instead, I was forced to go into Congress, get berated by people that don't know what they're talking about, and I told them what could potentially happen. And again, it did happen.
If you guys like this content, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.